When Dustin called me early on a Sunday morning, I knew something was wrong. The hacker sounded terrified. "Hey, there is something you need to know." "What is it, Dustin?" I asked. "You sound nervous." "I am more than nervous," the Russian hacker admitted. "Something happened. I am listening." "I just received an alert from my recording box I inserted into NORAD's main satellite. It seems that the American sky-watching ballistic missile early warning system is on high alert, and the POR radars that monitor the seas are also picking up hostile signals from a Russian nuclear-armed submarine." "How do you know all this?" I questioned. Dustin cleared his throat. "I intercepted the data that was being relayed directly to NORAD's command post inside Cheyenne Mountain. The report mentioned that they suspected that a gigantic Russian nuclear-armed submarine is preparing to launch an underwater missile towards the United States." I answered carefully. "This is insane. It will cause a nuclear war." My friend took a breath before speaking. "I know, but this is a false alarm." "What do you mean, Dustin?" I asked, very confused now. I tried to verify the story, so I contacted my friend who works in the Sevastopol naval base and is currently part of the Black Sea Fleet. He told me this is a hoax. Russian Navy did not aim any weapon towards America. It must have been a staged operation. "How could NORAD be mistaken?" I asked. The brilliant code breaker spoke slowly. "NORAD has been supplied with false information. I double-checked their source. They received a call from a former employee of League 13 that served under that NSA Black Ops director." "Oh, no," I involuntarily groaned. "Not Richard again." "I am afraid it looks like that, but Richard is running the show by proxy, so he is making his former employees do this for him." "I thought Richard was under investigation from the Senate Intelligence Committee," I reminded Dustin. "He was, but after he single-handedly brought in the alert and tipped off the Defense Department about an impending Russian nuclear strike, he got back his credibility, and the Department of Justice decided to suspend their investigation on him." "How is Richard still doing this?" "He was reinstated as the head of the NSA after he brought in this tip," Dustin informed me. "White House was pleased with his progress, and he was duly promoted and was given operational control over the missile launches. But only the American president has the authority to order a nuclear launch, right?" "That is true, and the POTUS gave the USS Seawolf full permission to launch the nukes at Russia," Dustin said sadly. "He believed in Richard and thought the United States was under attack. The US government is not stupid," I insisted. "They wouldn't just randomly order a nuclear strike on a powerful country like Russia." "They were manipulated," Dustin stated flatly. "The White House believed that the Russians are prepared to launch sea-based ballistic missiles, and the president gave the order to retaliate to counterbalance the Russian forces. I thought about the consequence of the disaster that was about to take place, so I asked, what kind of retaliation did the president order? He gave green light to USS Seawolf, a nuclear-powered attack submarine that is armed with nearly 30 nuclear-guided Trident missiles. Do you know what will happen if even one of those American torpedoes hit the motherland? Together, the bombs contain 15 megatons of explosives, and that is equivalent so much more than the total destruction carried out by all sides in the Second World War. The deadly force will annihilate everything." "How deadly are we talking about, Dustin?" "In the entirety of World War II, only 5 megatons of explosives were used by all fighting parties that were involved, and one of these nuclear-tipped American Trident missiles in USS Seawolf has enough devastating firepower that could effectively wipe out the largest Russian cities within seconds." "Where is the USS Seawolf now?" "The Seawolf was deployed to the Arctic region last month, so it is the closest vessel to the Russian border. That is why the president tasked this submarine with this retaliation job." "Okay, Dustin, when was this order given?" "Just now," the hacker informed me, "which means American naval commander inside the Seawolf are going to launch the nuke any hour. There must be a way to contact them to tell the submarine commander to wait a few minutes and delay the launch. I have to find a way to stop the missile from going off." "What are you thinking?" Dustin asked. "The only way to stop this disaster is to contact the American submarine and persuade the captain to cancel the launch. He won't listen to you, in disobedience to the President of the United States. He will if we can prove that Russia was framed and that the Russian submarine never locked aim at the United States or any other country. It was a bluff in which Richard used a group of hackers to mess up the radar system and make it look as though Russia was launching a nuclear Tip-C-based guided missiles at the United States. But the American military chiefs and the White House all agreed with Richard and declared they should attack Russia before they had a chance to strike, and the sitting president gave a green light for the nuclear strike, an attack that would devastate a city as large as Moscow in seconds. I don't see how we can stop this. Damn it. I can't just stand here and let the world get destroyed. If the American submarine launches the nuclear missile, millions of Russian civilians would die. And the worst result of this catastrophe would be that Russia would have no choice but to retaliate and strike back with nuclear warheads. And many densely populated American cities would also be destroyed. Millions of Russian and American citizens would die in a senseless and dangerous war. Dustin remained quiet for a long time, and then he spoke. I am praying that we can prevent it in time. Find me a way to talk to the submarine's commanding officer. I told him. Right. Dustin paused, and I could hear him typing on his keyboard fiercely. Captain Alan Gilmore. He is in charge of the USS Seawolf and has been tasked to launch the nuclear missiles. Get me on a phone line with him. And try to find out the exact location of USS Seawolf. It will be a little hard to track the vessel because nuclear submarines do not use active sonars since it could betray their position to the enemy. The Seawolf is a massive vessel. It is a classic 19,000 tons of nuclear-powered Navy submarine that has a fully operational nuclear reactor in there. I am not interested in the boat, Dustin. Just tell me how do they navigate. They use an inertial navigation system. These are basically a GPS system that uses accelerometers and gyroscopes to record the last known GPS location and use it as a guiding point. You must know some sort of submarine tracking technology. I am trying, but I am really sorry to say that I am not being able to find a secure line to contact Captain Gilmore. Dustin said, apologetically. I don't understand. There must be some way to communicate with the American sailors. I inquired. How do their families contact them? Via email. Each sailor in the submarine is given a unique email address that the families can then use to write to them, but it is heavily censored. Then let's use secure radio channels. I suggested. I am afraid once the submarine is submerged in salt water, most radio waves do not pass through the ocean water. Then how do they communicate? I wanted to know. Most US submarines communicate using very low frequency waves, like the VLF transmitters. VLF signals can penetrate salty ocean. Yes, but it is also on a low bandwidth, which means it's really slow. So, we can pass messages, but not in real-time audio or video. But will the sailors receive our message? They will, Dustin confirmed. But they won't be able to respond to VLF frequency. To reply to our message, they will have to rise several hundred feet and upload their response, or acknowledgement. It took Dustin nearly 1 hour to establish a secure link to the submarine's main deck. I used the military clearance code and requested to speak to the commander of USS Seawolf. Alan Gilmore answered the call, and after hearing that I had some important update about the nuclear launch, he told me stay on the line while he solved another emergency crisis. The captain put me on hold, and I could hear restless conversations taking place in the background. It sounded as though Captain Gilmore was making an announcement in the submarine central miking system. Alert 1. Incoming emergency action message. A robotic voice echoed. Another anxious voice spoke. Captain, we have a properly formatted emergency action message from the National Command Authority for a strategic missile launch, sir. Captain Gilmore answered brusquely. Get the authenticator and have the skipper check the battle station's torpedo and man the station's missile for strategic launch. Sir, request permission to authenticate. Permission granted. Authenticate. It was Captain Gilmore's voice. From my end of the line, I heard several Marine cryptographers reading the sequence of 18 letters and numbers to verify the president's order to launch the nuclear missile. Alpha, Echo, Tango, Beta, Echo, Niner, Charlie. After 2 minutes, the captain confirmed that the message was authentic and he concurred with the launch order by activating his missile key. Set Condition 1 status quo for strategic missile launch. Captain Gilmore declared in a grim voice. The release and launch of nuclear weapons have been authorized. Enter the launch keys. But sir, another voice spoke shrilly. Captain, we are out of VLF radio range. Our optimal messaging capacity is cutting off. Alan Gilmore answered calmly. Then extend the low-frequency antenna and attempt to resume connection with Pentagon. A minute later, his voice sounded louder, and he addressed me again. I don't know who you think you are, but according to reliable intel I received, the Russian Navy have threatened to launch nuclear missile against our country and are fueling their submarines right now. Pentagon sent word that they will have launch capability in 60 minutes. I was given orders to launch our missiles, which is exactly what I am going to do. Captain, you need to listen me. This is a life and death matter. If you launch those missiles at the Russian Federation, then they will retaliate. It'll start a full-blown nuclear war. I pleaded with the submarine commander, hoping he would see some sense in what I was saying. But Captain Gilmore replied resolutely. I have orders directly from the President of the United States, and as a military man, I am bound by oath to obey the orders of my Commander-in-Chief. Captain, I know you are a good man, and you are serving in the army because you want to defend your country. Think about what will happen to America if you do this. I am defending my country. I am trying to protect America from a Russian strike. I told you before, this was a hoax. Someone sabotaged the NORAD's radar system and raised a false alarm to convince the White House to order a nuclear strike on Russia. But the truth is they never planned to attack us. And if you hit them first, Russia will have no choice but to hit back. Captain, ask yourself if you live with that. Can you sit back in your submarine and allow millions of Americans to burn to death? What do you expect me to do? Disobey a direct order? Gilmore sounded worried. I am merely asking you to wait a little while until we can accurately verify the situation. So far, the Russian defense agencies denied all accusations and said they did not aim any weapons at the United States. If that is true, White House will definitely send you the abort code. It is a huge risk that you are asking me to take. Captain, I am not asking you to do anything wrong. Just listen to your own conscience and use common sense here, sir. The American submarine commander spoke slowly. Your transmission is coming through a very low-frequency receiver. We are reading you clearly. Sir, all I am asking is you verify the order and double-check with the White House. Negative, Captain Gilmore said harshly. We are too deep beneath the ocean to receive any radio communication. There is limited radio transmission here. I immediately replied. Then you need to rise to shallow waters to re-establish communications. Someone is using you to begin a third world war. It is too late for that, young man. I have already authorized the launch. Captain, I beg you, do not launch a missile. It would be the most grievous error made in this century. The Russians did not plan to attack the United States. Please, trust me this one time. I was still speaking to the American submarine commander when the transmission broke off. I did not know whether he intentionally severed the communication line or if the submarine was too deep underwater to read my transmission signals. In any case, I became more and more agitated. Dustin wanted to help me, but there was not much either of us had the capability of doing. I could not call the White House and tell them to cancel the nuclear missile launch. I knew they would never listen to either me or my friend. I remembered an old mentor who had spoken to me previously about the suspicious activities of Irina's stepfather. Richard was a junior member at the State Department, and the man had warned me to be careful. Rear Admiral Kent Hogan was an unusual man. He was brilliant, but also intuitive. I first met him when Richard recruited me to work for the NSA's Black Ops unit. Kent Hogan was the head of the National Counterintelligence and Security Center and was formerly the director of Pentagon Force Protection Agency. I dialed Hogan's number from memory and waited. His call went to answering machine, but I quickly left a message, explaining the urgent situation I was in. I told the admiral how it was imperative he do everything in his power to prevent the United States Navy from launching nuclear missiles at the Russian Federation. As I was leaving the emotional voicemail, the line clicked and Kent Hogan answered. What a surprise to hear from me. I breathed in relief. I knew this man would be able to help and guide me. Please, Admiral. I need to know what is happening. The Rear Admiral sighed. Pentagon officials just announced that all U.S. military forces have been directed to set DEFCON 2. What? I almost shouted. The last time America entered a state of emergency was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Washington thinks this one is even more deadly, so they gave authority to the USS Seawolf to initiate a potential preemptive strike. Kent Hogan stated. But, sir, you know this isn't right. Russia is being framed. They didn't aim any missiles at America. Someone gave Pentagon a false reading. I suspected that, Rear Admiral Hogan said calmly. And the only way we can prevent a disaster is if some powerful leader in Kremlin contacts Washington directly and clarify this issue. How do we get word to this powerful Russian leader? I asked, bewildered. Not we, Hogan clarified. You are a Russian citizen, so you will be making contact with someone I trust. I can't just call the Russian embassy. You know, in my position, it will look very treasonous to the Pentagon, and I could lose my job over it. But you should phone him right away. The man you need to talk to is now sheltering in place at the American embassy in Moscow. Did the US consulate come under any threat as well? I asked, wondering why embassy officials were sheltering in place. Not officially, Rear Admiral Hogan said, but embassy staffs reported heightened security since the missile crisis. But they are not too worried. The US embassy in Moscow was built to be entirely self-sufficient. It is practically a fortress that has its own electric generator, its own water filtration plant, its own sewage, a private fire station, and even its own internet uplink to circumvent the Russian network. They are really scared. I commented sadly. Of course, they are. We all are worried sick, the American admiral replied. The US Navy believes that Russians are prepared to launch sea-based ballistic missiles aimed at the eastern seaboard. That is absurd, I exclaimed. I checked with trusted sources in Moscow, and they said they don't even have any nuclear submarine anywhere near the United States. Well, I can't say how reliable those sources are, but the D and NSA are both on high alert. They claim they received an anonymous tip with a radar reading that showed Russian ships mobilizing their nukes. Now, we think there might be a deadly confrontation soon. How much area are we talking about? In terms of impact? Rear Admiral Kent Hogan paused before answering my question. Well, they are being smart, so they are not launching an overhead missile, because they know NORAD's anti-missile protection will block any incoming projectiles, but if the Russians succeed in launching the nuclear missile from a submarine, it will cause great devastation. It will only detonate underwater, right? I asked, a little anxiously. There shouldn't be civilian casualties. It is not how nukes work. If the nuke hits at our eastern coast, New York, Philadelphia, Washington D.C., and even Massachusetts will immediately experience massive tsunami that will be triggered by the underwater explosion. How many lives will be directly impacted by the tsunami or tremor? It is hard to say, but at least 20 million people live around those areas. And we didn't even factor in how deadly and contaminated that radioactive water would be, and how far-reaching consequence it will have for another 100 years. For the next 15 minutes, Rear Admiral Kent Hogan continued to give me detailed information about his contacts, and he told me to call them at once and try to defuse the nuclear crisis. I recalled a conversation I had a week earlier with an intelligence analyst who was asking me to help him shut down an illegal arms trade in the Baltic region. I was curious about the mysterious international weapons traders, so I asked him what kind of group they were. Arms dealers, Chuck had told me. They were trading long-range missiles, unmanned boats, and anti-ship weapons in exchange for whitened money. They recently purchased an underground storage facility adjacent to the ice box. I was confused. What is the ice box? It is a codename for a Russian nuclear missile base near Lake Pyasino. The site is believed to be storing at least 50 MIRV-equipped intercontinental ballistic missiles. If the wrong people get access to that base, then they would be in the possession of several dozen deadly weapons. Chuck was a senior national security official in the George H. Bush administration, and he currently worked at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in West Virginia. He displayed several photographs before me. I refocused my attention on the minuscule images of the landscape. What am I looking at? These are satellite images as showing renewed activity at a Soviet nuclear facility. Chuck informed me. Inside sources tell me that the communist regime is preparing to start or has already started reprocessing plutonium for nuclear weapons. How did you come across this image? I wanted to know. It was a commercial satellite that exposed this. The photo showed smoke rising from a small building at a radiochemistry laboratory in the Urals and heavy vehicle movement from an adjacent thermal plant. The lab in question is known to reprocess spent fuel rods to extract plutonium for nuclear bombs. Do you have any previous satellite imagery of that region? I do, in fact. Previous satellites' images showed signs of suspicious activity at the thermal power plant in recent weeks. But the CIA already knows that, I reminded Chuck. Who asked you to conduct this investigation? Oh, you remember the nice old man from NSA's Zero Division. You're talking about the Black Ops group? I inquired. Chuck nodded. Yes, I call him Richard. Well, he asked me to look for some incriminating evidence against the Kremlin so we can use it for leverage. I did some digging, and all I am saying is that the latest activity suggests that the USSR, or whatever is left of it, has launched a new effort for nuclear reprocessing. If you are running an errand for Richard, then I don't think you need my help, Chuck. Good luck. The meeting between Chuck and myself lasted less than 10 minutes, but I realized that it was most probably another trick Richard was pulling on the Eurasian continent. My mind jolted back to present-day reality when I received an alert on my computer. Dustin had just forwarded a radio transmission to me, which came directly from Captain Gilmore. It appeared that the commander of the USS Seawolf had aborted the missile launch sequence and decided to listen to me after all. I was elated to hear the news, but my happiness was short-lived. Moments later, a second message was intercepted by Dustin's satellite that showed a new chain of command in the American nuclear-armed submarine. After investigating further, I discovered that the captain of the submarine was placed under arrest and his second-in-command assumed the position of captain in the Navy vessel. I immediately contacted the new commander, who was an inexperienced young sailor, and I begged him to halt the missile launch, but this young naval commander was staunchly disagreeing with me. The new commander told me the message was crystal clear. The emergency action message was a unique code used by the US military to relay orders to missile-firing nuclear submarines via special transmitters designed for communication with stealth submarines. He also said he received a direct order from the NSA's Black Ops chief and the Pentagon, instructing him to arrest Captain Gilmore for disobeying a direct command of the president. I told the young man how he should not under any circumstances agree to launch the missiles, but he refused and ended the radio transmission abruptly. Yevgeny was a prosecutor at the Babushkinsky District Court in Moscow. I called him on a direct line to his office phone and told him about the danger his city was facing. He was terrified to hear that American submarines were preparing to launch nuclear missiles at Russia, and he promised to contact senior State Duma members to arrange an emergency meeting with their American counterparts. Yevgeny also told me he suspected a certain hacker for creating the false radar reading that showed NORAD that Russia was planning to attack North America. Who is this hacker? I asked Yevgeny. I only know his surname. Dr. Lenz, I think. Very well. I will keep you apprised as soon as I find out more about Lenz. As soon as I ended the call with Yevgeny, I called my friend Dustin and told him to find everything he could find on Lenz. 5 minutes later, the brilliant code breaker spelled out the home address and phone number of Lenz. One more question, Dustin. What is so special about this Lenz? This kid was a genius. An MIT graduate. Top of his class. Won the International Hacker Award for 3 years in a row. He disappeared in Portugal after meeting with this man. Recognize him? I studied the black-white photo of a bald man. I know him. He is one of Richard's most trusted associates. What would they want with a hacker like Lenz? They could have been after his computer specializations, Dustin suggested. He was an expert in monitoring submarine radars. And we believe he also knew how to manipulate the maritime readings. Does that mean Lenz would have the capability of faking a radar alert, making it appear as though Russia was trying to nuke America? Dustin weighed his words carefully before replying. The satellite images I was able to access over Portugal suggests that the hacker was abducted and he is currently being forced to do these for his kidnappers. I also learned from Dustin that Lenz was an MIT honors graduate with a degree in nonlinear crypto algorithms and stochastic system analysis. I had learned that DARPA hired Lenz as soon as he graduated from MIT University, then he moved out of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in Arlington, Virginia, in order to build a lab of his own. He was later found to be carrying out illegal hacking experiments, and the Federal Bureau of Regulations cancelled his license and banned him from accessing electronics. I had planned to contact the FBI and report a missing person report in order to locate the hacker, but before I had time to do that, a greater crisis loomed ahead. When the new commander of the USS Seawolf decided to move ahead with the nuclear launch sequence, he initiated the lockdown protocol, and this signal reached the Russian naval patrol instantaneously. NORAD satellites captured radio transmissions from the Russian Navy that gave the American submarine 3 severe warnings and asked them to halt the missile launch at once. Otherwise Russia would have to retaliate with their own missiles. When I read the message, I knew that the Russian military had finally realized that their nation was about to be annihilated by American nuclear warheads and they were only trying to defend their motherland, but I also knew there would be no winners in a nuclear war. I immediately contacted my friend who was an active member of Russia's Black Sea Fleet and told him to pause any potential missile strike. I spoke tearfully in my native language to the commander of the Russian fleet and begged him to listen to me. I told him not to give the order to launch nuclear missiles at the United States because then the White House would have its proof that Russia is an instigator. The commander told me he would have to retaliate to American aggression, but I pleaded with him to wait and make sure the attack was real. I asked him not to launch a weapon, even if he saw the USS Seawolf launching a live missile at them, because the whole farce was created by someone who wanted desperately to begin a war between America and Russia, destroying both great nations on the process. I thought no one would listen to me, but finally, one junior radio transmitter who had been listening to me speaking finally addressed me directly and told me he believed I was saying the truth and he agreed to tell his superiors that the American missile launch was a false alarm. Within minutes, the Russian Navy switched off their target lock switch and cancelled the nuclear missile launch. Meanwhile, Pentagon officials finally noticed that the Russian military disarmed and disengaged all their nuclear weapons and were not trying to attack America. The Russian defense minister also contacted the White House directly and explained how there had been a serious misunderstanding and that they were never intending to start a war. The minister also notified the Pentagon that a rogue element within the NSA was trying to cook up a false war. And the American Secretary of Defense then contacted the American submarine and told the commanders of USS Seawolf that the launch had been permanently cancelled. Since there had been several official complaints against Richard, the Senate Intelligence Committee held a month-long hearing about his misdemeanors, and although I never found out what the final verdict of the committee was, I did learn that Richard spoke fiercely in his own defense and pleaded that he framed Russia only because he was trying to do what he thought was best for the country. October 1990. Few months later, I was returning to the apartment arena I shared when I heard a desperate cry coming from an empty warehouse. It sounded as if woman was being beaten. I froze and my instincts kicked in. Ever since my mother died, I created a shell around myself that I hoped would protect me from harm. My mother defended me with her life and ultimately embraced death so I could go on living. But I didn't want to live. I never thought there would be any comfort or meaning in being alive without the protection and love of my mother. But despite my desperate ache to be in her company, I tried to survive by giving back. The scenes of my stepfather beating and assaulting my mother every evening haunted me all the time. I knew there were other helpless women in this world, loving and beautiful women like my mother who needed help, who needed someone to save them, so they didn't have to end up getting shot and killed like my dear mother had. I became sensitive to seeing women suffer. Even a random skirmish on the street or a bar, where a woman looked as though she was being manhandled, would shoot up my adrenaline and drive me into action. I couldn't bear to hear another woman cry in pain as a 10-year-old child. I couldn't save my mother. Now, I was determined to save this woman who was screaming. I ran into the downtrodden building to find out who was in trouble, but there was no one in the huge landing space. Then as I neared the source of the scream, I saw a large mic box. It was a pre-recorded sound. There was no one in danger. But I had been duped into believing someone needed my help. My gut feeling told me it is a trap, so I turned to leave. Just then, I felt a sting on my neck. It was a thick needle. I removed the sharp metal when another hit my thigh. Moments later, everything went dark. I am certain of one thing. No pain in the world can be more dreadful than that of electric shocks into your body. It is as though your eyes are on fire. Your muscles burn and tear under your skin. I know this because I have felt it firsthand. Even the slightest lack of cooperation would make my captors unleash a barrage of high voltage into my body. 1,000 different methods of torture were experimented on me. For how long, I am not sure, but I knew it was untenable. When I regained consciousness, I was no longer in the warehouse. I was in a lab, with no windows, strapped to a metal gurney, hypodermic needles sticking to my neck and arms. I couldn't move my body, it seemed paralyzed. There were people in surgical masks moving into my field of vision, but I couldn't see them clearly. They were wearing lab glasses. I was made to wear a heavy-set headphone, and strange eerie music was being played into my ears. Unintelligible sound encompassed my brains until I could not hear anything. I tried to move, but it was futile. The plastic straps that held me to the gurney was so tight that it cut into my skin. My thoughts flew back to the time I was first introduced to such terrors. It was right after my 16th birthday. I had run away from the Siberian orphanage in which I had languished for 5 years. When I was imprisoned and sentenced to death, fear had overpowered my senses as I languished in the dark chambers of a Siberian prison. However, my rescue came in the form of ghostly subversion. I was taken to the spy camp and granted a second chance at life. There, I lost my identity and nearly forgot my humanity. I was given a new name, new tools. To the world, I was dead. The routine for recruits were bizarrely conventional. For hours, we had to train to become fighters and saboteurs. Discipline was harsh. The slightest non-compliance would be met with severe repercussions. Sometimes I would become overwhelmed by feelings of helplessness and abandonment. My days were mired by uncertainty. New recruits who performed poorly would be cancelled. I wallowed in this sorry path, never knowing if I would be next. Physical exercises would be managed by the chief instructor, Mikhail. He was a brilliant tactician, but worked the recruits tirelessly. I was averse to obeying orders. Indeed, listening to the curses and barking orders of the instructors reminded me of my servitude in my own father's home where my mother and I took turns in being belittled and beaten by his fierce rage. I was not remotely inclined to return to a life of bondage and thus rebelled at every opportunity. I did not show up on time at the daily training or briefing. It was at one of these physical training that I was reprimanded severely and sentenced to 10 days in isolation. The recruits were ordered to get into pairs and practice fist fight and hand combat. I was easily able to overpower the recruit who was paired with me, so one of the instructors decided to test my limits and began to land blows after blows at my direction. I deflected a few punches before becoming distraught. I frantically struck back, as though fighting for my life. In my mind, the ghostly images of my father beating me with his belt was whirling like a tornado. I felt the instructor's fist on my arms, but I only saw the ruddy face of my angry father who in his drunken rage was pummeling my mother's face with his clenched fist. In frenzy, I howled and cowered in the middle of the padded floor. My trainer wanted me to get on my feet, so he slapped my face to get me up, but that was when I snapped. Like coiled spring, my rage exploded, and I grabbed the man's face and leaped on him, hitting him with all my strength. He tried to trap me in a headlock, but I twisted my body and bit his ears so hard that it came off. He screamed in agony and recoiled from me. Unfortunately, my outburst did not go unnoticed. From behind the opaque glass window of his office, the colonel saw what I did and wanted to send me to the sub-level room to be cancelled. He felt that I was too wild to be trained into a spy, but Mikhail intervened earnestly and lessened the sentence. I would not die but would have to spend a few days in an isolation cell. My behavior continued to be far from perfect. Inside the colonel's camp, I felt like a cornered animal. I could hardly remain calm, even though Mikhail tried to control my erratic behavior. More than once, I saw him giving the colonel various excuses on why I wrecked certain equipment. I did not know the reason for his unmerited kindness, but I remember telling him about my time in the orphanage. The silent man, his deep eyes seemed to understand my pain and heartache. Prior to coming to the training camp, I was genuinely ignorant in terms of technology and weapons management. I had never even seen a computer in my life. The first time I was allowed to enter a computer lab was exhilarating. I was taken aback by the round object that guided an arrow in the screen. The computer instructor, a thin boy with dark narrow eyes who looked younger than me, informed us that the item was called a mouse. It was astonishing. I was impressed by the computer. It took me weeks to learn how to right-click the main button and identify the keys. Once I became skilled in computers, I decided to gift the computer technocrat. I collected several mice from the camp's kitchen area and placed them in a closed box. I gifted it to the hacker. When he opened the gift box, he shrieked in fright. I was laughing because it seemed so hilarious at that time, but somehow no one else agreed with my sense of humor. I thought I was paying tribute to the computer mouse, but he was not amused. Occasionally, I paid dearly for my obstinacy. I was forced to clean all the weapons in the munitions depot and do hundreds of extra push-ups. The colonel repeatedly threatened to execute me if I did not perform better on the shooting practices. My instructors, who thought I was a wild savage, gave me extra chores every day in order to instill order in me. Before evening fell, I would be so exhausted that I could only stagger to the sleeping quarters and drop into my bed with full equipment and uniform. For nearly 2 years, my life went on in this meaningless cycle until Mikhail felt that he could no longer protect me. The colonel thought I had outlived my usefulness and he wanted me cancelled. Mikhail hurriedly sent me on a minor mission to Paris, where away from the colonel's prying eyes, I was able to survive for a few months without killing people. From there, I was transferred to London and stayed for several weeks. I gathered intel from various former camp agents who lived in the UK. Eventually, the colonel agreed that I would be suitable for an undercover mission in America. With my pale blonde hair and flat blue eyes, they thought I looked very American. My native English language skill was an added bonus. No one would suspect that I was a Russian boy. Upon arriving in America, I breathed the fresh air of freedom. I was sure the colonel couldn't hurt or coerce me anymore. I was safe. But not anymore. My mind drifts to the present as I am being wheeled into another brightly lit space. It looked like an operating room. My initial fear was that these men wanted to blind or maim me or damage my senses, but I later discovered that they had a more sinister plan. I was wheeled into a room with glaring overhead lamps and an attendant injected anesthesia to knock me out. I was surrounded by unusual medical equipment. One of the masked men brandished an IV needle and emptied the contents into my body. I awoke with a numb feeling in the lower part of my body. It was cold. With shock, I realized I was naked, but there were no restraints holding me to the metal stretcher. I couldn't move or feel my legs at all. I peered down and saw a bloody gauze around my torso. Using my right arm, I pushed the bandage off and saw that parts of my organs were missing. In the haze that was clouding my eyes, I wasn't certain what had transpired, but my testicles were gone, as though someone had surgically removed them. I cried out in horror, but my neck muscle was still paralyzed. I didn't know what these men wanted with me, but I knew I had to escape this frightful place before they cut off any more of my body parts. The dream of escaping was short-lived, however. Around half-dozen men swarmed into the room and carried me to a soundproof room where my first session of brainwashing began. For several months, I was injected with high doses of adrenaline shots in my right arm, while anesthetic drugs would be pumped into my left. It was done to destroy my mind's defense and make me incapable of fighting against the technique they were applying to me. For hours, I was subjected to various levels of electric voltage, most of which were applied directly to the center of my skull. Masked surgeons constantly made incisions on my torso and told me I was not a male. They said I was a woman who needed help to repair my reproductive organs. I was confused. Days passed and my confusion only emphasized. I genuinely forgot what my name was. Coherent speech was no longer something I was capable of. I didn't know what was happening to me, but I knew they were destroying my identity, breaking my resolve, piece by piece. Dreams are something you can't control. It is wonderful, because that means another person won't be able to control it either. I discovered this when I was being constantly brainwashed in the lab. I used to dream of my childhood, of the time when my mother was still alive, and in the worst nightmares, I would witness the day she died. It was so long ago, but the dreams were vivid. Women with dark cloaks were marching behind a funeral pyre, they were weeping. It was a burial. My mother's burial. A sweet and kind and beautiful woman who had always defended me against bullies. I could remember her death. I couldn't remember much else from my past, but the last time I saw her alive was etched into my subconscious. I would wake from these nightmares, wrecked with feverish tears. Then the masked men would return and begin another tirade of insult and abuse, nearly convincing me that I was woman who needed to copulate with a man in order to live a meaningful life. The things they whispered into my ear set was insensible, yet I somehow found myself believing their words. I looked at my own mutilated body. I didn't look like a man. My male organs had been cut off. My brain felt like it was being ripped from the inside. I was living a man-made nightmare. The electrotherapy decreased and ultimately ceased. Just when I started to think the worst was over, I was placed in a concrete cell with only a small sky-facing window. I was not given any food for days, it may have been weeks, but there was no way I could tell the time in the lightless cell. They would slide a tray of warm food towards the window, just beyond my reach until I wailed in desperation and hunger. I was sure they would starve me to death. Then came the dreaded meal, a bowl of rotten rice infested with maggots. That was my only sustenance after 7 days of total starvation. I couldn't make myself swallow the stench-filled putrid meal and vomited. I tried to seek refuge in my past, happy moments in my childhood, so I sifted through the debris of my youth, trying to find a single memory that did not augment the pain I was already feeling. It was hopeless. The next phase of my torture was waiting for me in the cell beside me. A fellow inmate who was being brainwashed along with me was tied to a chair. The short man who was responsible for administering the electric shock into my head handed me a small knife and told me if I killed the other prisoner, I would be set free. I rebuffed their suggestion and naturally refused to kill the prisoner. The consequence of my actions was severe. I was placed in the starvation bunker once more, and this time my sustenance consisted of dead rats only. Another 7 days of starvation followed. The jailer brought me a juicy burger and dangled it around my face. I begged to them to give me a morsel, a tiny bite of food, but they again took me to the prisoner next door and told me the only way I would get my meal was by killing that man. Once more, I staunchly refused. Then they brought the captive before me and began to torture him. The guards began to amputate the helpless man's arms and legs. They threatened to cut him into pieces and gouge his eyes out. The prisoner wept in pain and agony and begged to be freed. But I couldn't make myself kill him. The guards assured me that they would continue torturing him unless I killed him. I didn't know why they were obsessed with the idea of making me kill an innocent man, that they would spend hours inflicting pain to him so that I would agree to carry out the horrendous deed. When the guards cut off the ears of the innocent man, the prisoner begged me to end his misery. This time, I stabbed him without hesitation, running the knife into his abdomen. I could hear the satisfactory chuckle of the main jailer. He said I should have obeyed him sooner. The sadistic guards were pleased that they were able to compel me to kill a man, and they finally supplied me with fresh food and clothes. This cycle went on for a while, and I was compelled to kill more people. I don't know why I obeyed their every whim, as though I had no sense of right and wrong. I had become a robot, a killing machine. My brain was in chaos. The electrotherapy continued sporadically, and after every session, I grew more confused. Who was I? What did I do prior to coming here? Where am I being kept? The questions floated through my subconscious every day, but I could not form coherent memories. I was not sure if I had suffered memory loss, but my mind was oddly blank and remorseless.